Last week, we looked at Romans chapter 12 and verse 10, where he says, be devoted to one another. And we saw in that phrase two interesting uses of a love word. Be devoted is a compound word in which he uses part of phileo, which is the word for brotherly love, and the word storge, which is the natural affection that a mother might have for their child. And he says this kind of word put together is to be devoted, to show full familial affection for one another. And we talked about what does it mean not just to be nice to one another, but to actually feel towards one another as you would feel towards your very own child. This week, we're also going to look at that same verse, Romans 12 and verse 10, and we're going to look at the word honor. Now, I want to do a little bit of backdrop here. Romans 12, verses 9 through 21, is a whole series of phrases where Paul is saying, here's how we ought to act. You might call it a list of virtues. And this is not original with me. A commentary I was reading pointed this out, that it looks as if Paul is trying to contrast the list of vices that he gives in Romans chapter 1, verses 29 through 31. Now, Paul loves to do this. Remember in the book of Galatians, Paul says the works of the flesh are obvious. And he names these things that we can get wrapped up in that can define us. That can define a culture. Anybody living at that time would have said, oh, that defines the Gentiles, for example. And then Paul says, but we're not called to be that way. Well, and then he says the fruit of the Spirit is, and it's the exact opposite. Well, here in Romans 1, verses 29 through 31, Paul says, here is what a debased mind that follows after the culture of the day will end up looking like and doing. They'll be filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness, gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. And in contrast to that are people who live with a different mind. Romans 12:1 begins by saying, don't be conformed to this world, Romans 12:2, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And what would that look like? How will it play out? Verses 9 through 21, in a list of virtues that are so different than the vices that you inherit from the culture. But in verse 9 and in verse 21, we see the reference to holding on to what is good. So in chapter 12, verses 9 through 21, the whole section centers around how to hold on to what is good. And the first example in verse 10 is to love with brotherly affection and to outdo one another in showing honor. I want to explain a little bit about the culture of that day. This was an honor-shame culture. We don't quite live in that kind of culture in America. The best way to kind of compare this would be, in the modern day, would be to think of something like certain parts of India or maybe in Japan, in which if you think that you brought shame upon your family, that might be enough reason to quit your job in disgrace, even a very public job. Whereas in our country, our general approach is that if we're accused of something, our first thing is to what? Deny, 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 right? But in an honor-shame culture, if I've done something that brings reproach upon my family, the shame of it is such that I may want to just resign in disgrace. That's what the culture was like, honor and shame. But who shows honor, who deserves honor, and how you show honor. It's very different than we might think of in our world today. You are often shown honor based upon your pedigree. Romans loved to show honor to other Romans, or in certain rare circumstances, if they would conquer a village and the village had a lot to offer. Let's say it had money, or it had a wealth, it had gold, it had oil, it had something that they could use. They would name that city as a Roman colony. And now if you were born and raised in that city, you could claim Roman citizenship even if you had never been to Rome. Pretty remarkable. It's a way of getting honor. But what you wouldn't find is a slave owner treating a slave as an equal. What you wouldn't find is some highfalutin member of society treating the leper as if they were their own child. That didn't happen. And Rodney Stark, a church historian, says in the first century, there was one and only one place where the outsider, the outcast, the person from a different culture or a different background or of different economic status were treated with equal honor. And that was in the church of Christ. So this passage that says show honor is speaking into a culture that recognizes honor and shame, but says, I want you to imagine, not recognize what honor you've received through your pedigree, but I want you to see the honor that God's bestowed upon all human beings because they're made in the image of God. Well, now we have a hard job. We have to figure out which of our English translations is right in how to translate this verse. For example, if you have an NIV, it'll say, this is the second part of verse 10, it'll say, honor one another. Show honor to one another. And the idea here is to see value in the other person. Now you can find that language in Philippians 2 and verse 3, where it says, value others, value someone above yourself. So you might translate this idea of consider better. Let's just try that on for a second. That would be amazing. If that's what this verse is saying, that would be amazing because it's so countercultural. In a day in which it was really something to show love to people who the culture says you ought to show love to. That alone meant you were a pretty smart, pretty wise, pretty kind person. But to value people that the culture does not value, that's a step above. That would mean you're supposed to pursue honor, not for yourself, but for others. This is an example where the slave owner was to give honor to their slaves and to treat them as if they were their own children. And that attitude is one of the things that led to the end of slavery. Within the Christian system, when you begin to think, if I treat those who are under me the way God treats me, I can't treat them as anything other than my equals or my children. Now, that's one way to interpret this passage. That is to consider one another better than yourself. But there's another possible way of translating this passage, and this is what you have if you have an ESV or a New Revised Standard. Outdo one another in showing honor. Here's the difference. The first way is think of the other person as better than you. This one says, regardless of how you or anyone thinks of the other person, the onus is not on how you value the other person, but on how you act toward the other person. It has more to do with sort of your work ethic. The word used here for outdo one another is the normal word for leading an expedition in the ancient world. You take somebody out to visit a new city, a place they've never been before. I'm leading an expedition. And so one commentary translates it, lead one another forth with respect to honor. And you say, what does that mean? Well, if that's what he means, he's playing into a culture of competitiveness. Anybody here know what it's like to have a deeply competitive spirit? Okay. If you have brothers, you'll know what this is like. If you just love the thrill of victory. You want to, if you lose the game, you have to stay up another 3 hours until you play again because you have to win. The competitive spirit. It was a hugely competitive spirit in the ancient world. And playing into that, it's possible what he's saying is, in all your competitiveness, make it your aim to outdo everybody else you know in how much and how well you show honor. Wear yourself out in showing honor. I like either way this way is translated. Either way works. They're both very Christian. But I want you to try those on for size and think about what that is calling us to do. For example, when you think about considering others better than yourself, I think about that passage in 1 Timothy 5 that says, let the elders who rule well be considered worthy of double honor. In other words, you already have honor for them. But when you see them serving in such a powerful way, you can't help but notice, you give double honor. And when I think about the outdo yourself, outdo one another in showing honor, I think of the woman who breaks into the dinner table. And Jesus is eating with all of his guests, and she breaks open the alabaster jar of ointment, preparing him for his burial. This very, very expensive perfume. And what she's thinking is, I want to give all that I have, whatever is most expensive in my life, and I want to give it to him because I want to show honor. And of course, you can't help but wonder if the response about why would this woman waste so much money can't be spoken out of embarrassment compared to whatever measly gift they may have brought to the table for the dinner. So honor seems to be a really big deal for Paul. Got a couple of questions for you. How do we measure honor in our culture? How do you know that somebody honors you? They give you a plaque. Never had a chicken dinner. Isn't that somebody's line? Yes. All right, they give you a plaque, they give you a chicken dinner. What else? Applause. When people applaud you, that's a way of saying we honor you. What else comes to mind? How about money? Is money a way of showing honor? The average pay for a fireman in the United States. This is a person who puts their life on the line daily. It's $59,000. The average pay for a teacher, this is somebody who every single person who's ever accomplished something great in this world and will look back and say that they achieved greatness, they learned something wonderful, learned it from a teacher. The average pay for a teacher, now average, remember now, we got to include California in here, $72,000. I hear the teachers grumbling. The average pay for a judge, $100,000. President of the United States. Well, what I mean is, what does the country give the President of the United States? It is true, some presidents do forego. $400,000. $400,000. Does anybody want to guess about the National Football League? The average salary in the National Football League for this year, $3.2 million. The minimum for no experience sitting on the bench is $840,000. The average for a Major League Baseball player, $4.6 million. I'm guessing the Dodgers skew the average. The minimum $740,000. An average NBA player, the average NBA player for the 2024-2025 season, It's $11 million. If one of the ways we show honor in our culture is with money, we can find ourselves getting frustrated with how that's done. But money isn't the only way that we show honor. Military. 39. I had 42 written here. 39,000. Okay, I asked the question, how do we measure honor? How about this one? Who in our world is worthy of honor? I heard a good one there. Yes. The military. Those who put their life on the line for us. Who else is worthy of honor? Very good. The police officers. Who else? Firemen, yes. What's that? The elders. Yes, in 1 Timothy 5. Name some more people that are worthy of honor in our culture. Doctors. Nurses. God is worthy of honor. Very good. We should put that one at the very top. And we think about how do we show honor. Now, not all of us can go out and change the way in which our culture decides who gets paid what. But we can certainly think about what it means to show honor with what we have. And this is the point that we find throughout the New Testament. Remember when the man who is lame and wants to be healed, Peter and John see this man at the gate, this blind man who's out there collecting money, a lame man who's collecting money. And they say, silver and gold have I none, but what I have I'll give you. In the name of Jesus Christ, stand up and walk. Honor sometimes involves giving what one has. Does honor have to always be a public thing? There are some people who'd rather not have honor in a public way. It can be a private thing. But you'll find it's amazing when we start thinking about, this world doesn't honor the right people the right way. Somebody should do something about that. Well, someone can do something about that. You and I can do something about that starting now with what we do have. In the Old Testament, David loved his friend Jonathan. And in 1 Samuel 18 and 1 Samuel 20, he said he was going to show honor to Jonathan's family. So in 2 Samuel chapter 9, the text says that he set out to show honor to Jonathan's children. What would it mean for you and I to set out to show honor to those we believe honor is due? I can think of some simple ways we can do that. It can involve something as simple as talking well of them and talking well about them. What would it look like for us to practice the art of talking good behind someone's back? I heard a story just the other day of somebody who was babysitting children. And while babysitting the children, and this is not somebody babysitting my children, so somebody babysitting children, and they told the children while the parents were gone, you have got the best parents in the world. That little line is the kind of thing that might stay with those children. It's the kind of thing that's just different if the parents say that about themselves. I know, I try all the time. The babysitter to say, you have the most amazing parents in the world. Or how many of you have experienced what I've experienced, where you're eating your meal out and it's time to pay, and the sweet person who's serving you food comes and says, no, there's no bill. Someone has already volunteered to pay for your meal. How many of you have experienced that? Look, that's a simple way to show honor. Allow me to share a personal one with you. I received a letter in the mail a couple weeks ago, and it reads this way. Unsigned. Nathan, Yesterday's Sunday morning lesson from 1 John was the best sermon for me in my 78 years. It really helped me. I could tell you're preaching on your favorite subject, and now it's mine. Here's money for dinner for you and your family. A small gift, as is fitting. I don't need to tell you, some of my days are not that great, and I was not having a great day. But I had a great dinner. And that simple unsigned letter did more than say, here's money for dinner. What it said was, we value what you do. And that little thing goes a long way. Think about the small moments we have that we don't take advantage of that we could. Small things. You're passing by somebody in the hall. And someone say during the week, I haven't done this, so hold me to this. We're walking through the hall and someone says, hey, have you seen Tony? The easiest thing to say is, no, I haven't seen Tony. But you know what I could add? Tony, no, I haven't seen him today. But you know what? I love what Tony does for this place. I love how every time we come into the building and I see that something's been cleaned off, I can know that Tony has been doing his work and doing it well. I can imagine someone says back to me, well, I was just going to say hi. I didn't need all of that. But you take the opportunity to say something. You know why that's important? Because the criticism and the gossip that we say behind people's back, it gets back to them. You know that, right? It gets back to them. So wouldn't it be great if what gets back to them is you would not believe the nice thing that someone said about you the other day? You will see people's face change in a heartbeat when they hear that someone took time to honor me. It doesn't take much, but that little bit can go a long way. I want to hear from you. What are some simple ways that we can put into effect this line, outdo one another in showing honor? Yes.
I try to make it a habit, no matter how old they are, to walk up to a military person. The older folks, you can tell because they always wear the hats, that they're in the military and thank them for their service. And sometimes you just strike a conversation with them, and it's really interesting what you can hear.
Tony says he makes sure that anytime he sees a veteran, he reminds himself to thank them for their service. Thank you. What are some other simple ways that we can show honor? Yes.
When my mother died, I can't tell you how many people at Robinson Center in Conway emailed me and said, I have a whole list of emails that your mother sent for my child who led prayer in children's, like we do here on Sunday nights, for deacons for doing whatever it was they did. She was a note writer and she was an early adopter, and boy, she flooded the world with emails. She left this huge footprint of encouragement behind. I just ran across another account of that the other day that someone had sent me, and I thought how powerful that was for me.
You know, and that's a good point. Not just what you've done for me, Patty, but ways in which people that you love have blessed me. What a way to honor that person's memory. As we close, I want us to just think about that Paul says you can't make a list long enough. And there's not going to be something that's too simple or too low to try when it comes to what we can do to honor one another. And we do it two ways. We do it by valuing the other person, no matter what the culture says, but also recognizing that we have a responsibility to wear ourselves out in service because our Christ, our Savior, wore himself out to the point of exhaustion and to the point of death to show honor by recognizing that you and I were worthy to live with his Father forever because we were made in the image of God. Thank you for your attention.
Worship you.